The air was thick with a suffocating stillness, broken only by the low hum of the night. Darkness stretched across the land like a shroud, and the ancient castle atop the hill sat like a forgotten relic. Inside its crumbling walls, beneath layers of dust and decay, a secret had been buried for centuries. In the deepest chamber of the castle, hidden from the eyes of the living, a stone coffin lay undisturbed. The surface of the coffin was etched with arcane symbols, glowing faintly with a malevolent energy. The room itself was eerily cold, as though it had been frozen in time. Suddenly, a whisper echoed through the air. Faint, almost imperceptible, it grew louder, a disembodied voice calling from beyond the veil of death. Rise. The voice was neither human nor beast. It was ancient, cruel, and dripping with an insatiable hunger. The coffin trembled. The runes on its surface flared bright red, casting an otherworldly glow on the cold stone floor. Then, with a low groan, the lid slid open. From within, a pale hand, twisted and scarred, reached toward the outside world. Count Dracula had awoken. The creature within the coffin pulled itself out, its form shrouded in darkness. His skin was deathly pale, his eyes glowing a blood red that pierced through the shadows. Scars crisscrossed his face, remnants of battles fought over centuries, his immortality cursed with the reminder of his vulnerability. His fangs, long and sharp, glistened as he bared them to the empty room, hunger gnawing at his insides. But it was more than just hunger that stirred within Dracula. It was rage. The memory of betrayal by those who had sought to kill him was still fresh in his ancient mind. The foolish villagers thought they could vanquish him, thought that silver and stakes could contain the purest essence of darkness. As Dracula stood, his long black cloak draped around him like the wings of a monstrous bat, the castle around him seemed to stir to life. The wind howled through the cracked windows, the portraits on the walls seemed to watch with hollow eyes, and the shadows in every corner grew darker and more menacing. He could feel the power coursing through him, an ancient force that had long been dormant. His awakening had consequences. With him, something darker had stirred. The ancient curse that bound him to the earth was now unleashed once more. Far below, in the village that cowered at the foot of the hill, the people slept in ignorance of the terror that had returned. They had heard the legends, whispered by their ancestors, of the creature that lived in the castle. But years had passed without a single sign, and the old fears had faded. Until now, the ground trembled as Dracula took his first step outside the crypt, his every movement sending ripples through the earth. The air around him seemed to crackle with energy, and the night creatures, the wolves, the bats, the owls, sensed the return of their master. In the distance, the faint howls of wolves echoed through the forest, heralding his return. Dracula's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the village. His lips curled into a cruel smile, his teeth gleaming under the pale moonlight. He could smell them, their blood, their fear, their lives waiting to be claimed. But something was different this time. He was not just awakening to feed, he was rising for vengeance. A faint voice echoed in his mind, that of a woman's cry, a memory from long ago. The one who had dared to defy him, the one who had sealed his fate centuries ago. She was gone, but her descendants remained. He would find them. He would make them pay for her betrayal. With inhuman speed, Dracula vanished into the night, the wind carrying the echo of his laughter through the valley. In the village, the children stirred in their sleep, sensing something was terribly wrong, while the elders woke, eyes wide with terror, for they knew what had returned. The nightmare had begun again. The chapter begins with Paul, Anna, and Michael attempting to recover from the terrifying encounter in Dracula's chamber. They are back in one of the castle's abandoned rooms, trying to form a plan of escape, but Dracula's presence weighs heavily on them. Unbeknownst to them, the Count is already setting his sights on one of them. Now fully awakened, Dracula's thirst for blood becomes insatiable. He knows he must feed soon, but instead of attacking outright, he decides to toy with his prey. He manipulates the castle's atmosphere, sending strange dreams and whispers into their minds as he watches from the shadows, savoring their fear. Michael becomes the primary target of Dracula's growing obsession. Though unaware at first, Michael is drawn into Dracula's seductive mental influence. He begins to have strange visions, seeing the Count in flashes, beckoning him into the deeper recesses of the castle. Paul and Anna notice Michael's behavior becoming increasingly erratic, but they chalk it up to the stress of their situation. In the late evening, Michael's desire to leave the castle grows unbearable. The visions and whispers intensify until he can no longer ignore them. He begins to believe that the only way to escape the castle is to face Dracula alone. He sneaks out of the room they've barricaded themselves in, leaving Anna and Paul behind, and heads toward the courtyard. Dracula watches with amusement as Michael ventures outside. The night is still and cold, the air thick with tension. Michael walks deeper into the castle's surrounding woods, drawn to the sounds of whispers and the rustling of leaves. Unseen by Michael, Dracula stalks him from the shadows, his eyes glowing with hunger. Michael reaches a clearing, where Dracula finally reveals himself. The Count, tall and menacing, stands before Michael, but instead of attacking, he speaks to him in a soothing, almost fatherly tone. He offers Michael eternal life, the same offer he extended to Paul, but twisted by the promise of an end to his suffering and fear. Michael is torn between terror and temptation. He sees no way out of the situation and begins to rationalize Dracula's offer. The fear of death, the hopelessness of their escape, and the overwhelming presence of the Count begin to crack his resolve. But just as he contemplates giving in, he realizes the true horror of Dracula's offer. It is not life, but enslavement, a life of blood and darkness. Sensing Michael's hesitation, Dracula strikes. He lunges at Michael with supernatural speed, sinking his fangs into the young man's neck. Michael's world goes dark as Dracula feeds, his body growing weaker with each passing second. The brutality of the attack is swift and efficient, but Dracula takes no pleasure in it. He feeds out of necessity, cold and calculated. Back in the castle, Paul and Anna discover Michael's absence and set out to find him. They follow the trail into the woods, only to come upon Michael's lifeless body, drained of blood and lying cold in the clearing. The sight of their friend's corpse sends shockwaves through them, as they realize the full extent of the danger they're in. Anna breaks down in tears, while Paul is consumed with guilt for not protecting his friend. Michael sat in silence, his eyes darting nervously around the room as Paul and Anna argued in hushed voices. His skin prickled, and he could feel a presence, something watching, waiting just beyond the shadows. It was the same sensation he'd felt since they had arrived, only now it was stronger, more insistent. Dracula was near. Michael. Anna's voice broke through his thoughts, but it sounded distant, muffled. Are you okay? He blinked and looked up at her, forcing a weak smile. I'm fine. Just tired. But he wasn't fine. The whispers had been growing louder, slipping into his mind whenever he closed his eyes. They were soft at first, just faint echoes at the edge of his consciousness. But now, they were clear, and they carried a command that was impossible to ignore. Come to me. He couldn't tell Paul or Anna. They wouldn't understand. How could they? He wasn't even sure he understood himself. All he knew was that Dracula was calling him, pulling him towards something dark and ancient, and no matter how hard he tried to resist, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to go. In the distance, a soft rustling sound echoed through the hallway, like the fluttering of wings. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna and Paul exchanged worried glances. "Michael, it's not safe out there," Paul warned, stepping toward him. "You can't go alone. I'll be fine," Michael insisted, backing toward the door. "I won't go far." Before they could stop him, he slipped out of the room, the cold air of the castle hallways hitting him like a slap. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he walked down the corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. The whispers were getting louder, guiding him, pulling him deeper into the castle's embrace. "Come to me, Michael." The voice was unmistakable now. Dracula's voice, rich and commanding, resonating in his mind like the toll of a bell. Michael felt his pulse quicken as he descended a staircase and made his way toward the castle's outer courtyard. The night air was sharp and bitter, but Michael barely noticed. He walked through the courtyard in a daze, his breath visible in the cold. The trees rustled softly, their branches swaying in the wind. In the distance, he could see the dark outline of the forest, the same forest they had crossed when they first arrived. It was there, just beyond the trees, that Dracula was waiting. Michael stepped into the woods, his feet crunching on the dead leaves beneath him. The further he walked, the more isolated he felt. The whispers had stopped, replaced by the eerie stillness of the night. His breath came in shallow gasps as he reached a clearing, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground. And then, he saw him. Dracula stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and motionless, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. His presence was overwhelming, filling the air with a cold, oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Michael stopped in his tracks, his heart hammering in his chest. "Welcome, Michael," Dracula said, his voice low and smooth. "I have been waiting for you." Michael's body trembled as Dracula approached, his footsteps silent on the forest floor. There was something almost graceful about the way the Count moved, a fluidity that made him seem less human, more like a shadow slipping through the night. "I know what you're feeling," Dracula continued, his voice hypnotic. "The fear, the confusion, the desire to escape, but there is no escape, Michael. Not from me." Michael's legs felt like lead, his mind a whirlwind of terror and fascination. He wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't obey him. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the presence of the creature before him. Dracula stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locking onto Michael's. "I can give you what you desire," he whispered. "An end to your fear. An end to your suffering. All you have to do is surrender." For a moment, Michael's mind reeled. He thought of Paul and Anna, of their desperate attempts to survive, to find a way out. But in that instant, those thoughts seemed so far away, so insignificant compared to the promise that Dracula was offering him. "I can't," Michael breathed, his voice shaking. "I can't." Dracula's smile widened, revealing the sharp points of his fangs. "You already have," he said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper. Before Michael could react, Dracula lunged. The world around him blurred as the Count's hands gripped his shoulders with inhuman strength, pulling him close. Michael's breath hitched in his throat as Dracula's fangs pierced his neck, the pain sharp and sudden. A scream tore from his throat, but it was cut short as his body went numb, the life draining from him with each passing second. Dracula's grip tightened as he drank deeply, savoring every drop of Michael's blood. For Michael, time seemed to warp, stretching into an eternity of darkness and cold. His heartbeat slowed, each thud growing fainter, and yet, in that unbearable stillness, there was an odd sense of peace. The pain began to fade, replaced by a creeping numbness that spread through his body like a heavy fog. His thoughts blurred, and the distant memories of Paul and Anna dissolved into nothingness. All that remained was Dracula's voice, echoing in his mind, offering a twisted sense of solace in his surrender.